Have you ever had that feeling where you know something's off? You go to get help because you're feeling overwhelmed or scattered, but you keep being told it's probably just depression or anxiety. Well, it's an incredibly common story, and for so many people, it's just not the whole picture. Today, we're going to walk through an anonymized case study that follows this exact journey, from that frustrating cycle of feeling misunderstood, all the way to the amazing clarity that real data can bring. Let's dive in.
And this feeling, right here, this quote really gets to the heart of the problem. This is from the person whose journey we're following. She had these very real, specific struggles she wanted to tackle, but the usual talk therapy just wasn't hitting the mark. It wasn't giving her the direct, structured tools she felt she needed. And you know what? That's often a huge sign that maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on right under the surface.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start in what I call the diagnosis maze. Then we'll explore the often hidden symptoms of inattentive ADHD. After that, we'll see what a neuropsychological deep dive actually looks like, decode the powerful data that comes out of it, and finally, look at the clear path forward, from getting a diagnosis to taking real action.
Okay, let's start inside that maze. For years, the client we're talking about was looking for help. She described feeling totally overwhelmed, like she couldn't get anything done, and just had no idea where to even begin. Now, to a doctor, that can sound a whole lot like a mood disorder, right? But here's the thing, and it's so important. It's the why behind those feelings that matters most.
This slide just breaks down that crucial why perfectly. Take this example. The client absolutely loved to read, but she could never finish a book. Her mind would just wander off and she'd have to reread the same page again and again. See, it wasn't a loss of interest, which is what a depression diagnosis might point to. It was an inability to sustain her focus. That distinction is everything, and it's exactly where so many people get stuck for years.
So that brings us to the very specific profile of what's called predominantly inattentive ADHD. Unlike the hyperactive type that you might picture, which is usually more obvious on the outside, the inattentive type is often this really quiet, internal battle. It's a struggle with something called executive functions. The best way to think about these is like the CEO of your brain, the part that's in charge of planning, organizing, switching focus, and keeping your impulses in check.
And this right here, this is the day-to-day reality of it. The client told a story about spending 4 hours in her garden, working a little bit in 12 different spots, and at the end of it all, feeling like she'd done absolutely nothing. The same exact thing would happen when she was setting up her classroom. Tons of activity, but very few things actually got finished. She knew where everything was in her piles of organized chaos, but it was a system that, let's be real, only she could understand.
And here's a really key point. For a lot of adults, these underlying challenges don't become a massive problem until life gets really complex. As a teacher and a mother of 3, this client's life was a non-stop juggling act. The constant need to divide her attention, plan things out, and manage a household, well, it just cranked the volume up on these difficulties until they were basically impossible to ignore anymore.
So if that's the problem, how in the world do you get a definitive answer? Well, you have to move past the subjective checklists and get into objective data. And that's exactly where a neuropsychological assessment comes in. It stops being about what you feel is wrong and starts being about measuring what's actually happening inside the brain.
Think of it like this. If your car is making a weird noise, you don't just describe the sound to the mechanic, right? They hook it up to a diagnostic computer to see the real data. This assessment is basically that, but for your brain. It uses a whole battery of standardized tests to get a data-driven picture of how you think and process information.
So the evaluation zeroes in on 3 key areas to get the full picture. First, it directly tests attention and hyperactivity. Second, it measures those core executive functions, things like planning and task switching. And third, it assesses emotional well-being, which is so important for carefully figuring out which symptoms are caused by ADHD versus what might be coming from anxiety or depression.
Okay, this is where the story gets really, really compelling. Because after all those years of confusion and frustration, the test provided this moment of pure, data-driven clarity. It's time to look at the numbers that honestly changed everything for our client.
So what did they actually find? Let's take a look at the scores that tell the whole story.
Okay, check this out. This is where you see this incredible stark contrast in the data. Her mental stamina, that raw energy to just stick with something, was exceptional. We're talking the 99.9th percentile. She has a huge cognitive gas tank. But, and this is the whole story, her ability to actually use that energy, it was severely impaired.
Her focus, her ability to apply consistent effort, and her skill at switching between tasks, all of them were way, way below average. Let's just visualize one of these for a second. To really let it sink in, task switching is what lets you move from one project to another, or even just from one step to the next, without totally losing your train of thought. The average score is 100. Her score was 62. This explains the garden beds. It explains starting a dozen different things in her classroom but finishing none of them. She had all the energy in the world, but her brain just struggled to shift gears effectively.
So, at the end of the day, the data provided validation. This was never a personal failing. It wasn't laziness, and it certainly wasn't a lack of intelligence. Her IQ was comfortably in the high average range. It was a measurable, neurological difficulty in directing her brain's incredible resources where they needed to go.
And this, right here, this is the most hopeful part of the whole story, because a clear diagnosis isn't the end of the road. It's the starting line. Once you have objective data, you can create a truly effective and targeted plan to manage everything.
And this slide lays out exactly what that can look like. The final report recommended specific, actionable strategies. First, medication, aimed directly at ADHD symptoms. Second, checklists, which is a way to basically externalize that struggling executive function, offloading the mental work of planning onto a piece of paper. Third, building structure with daily schedules. And finally, mindfulness, which isn't just a buzzword here. It's a targeted exercise to strengthen the brain's focus muscle, the very thing the data showed was impaired. These aren't just vague suggestions. They are tools tailored specifically to the data.
So we'll end on this thought. For so many of us, the things we see as our personal flaws, our disorganization, our procrastination, our inability to just get it done, they might not be character defects at all. They might just be symptoms. And getting the right data and the right diagnosis isn't about finding an excuse. It's about finally getting the right instruction manual for how your unique brain actually works.